out some that I know really helped me when I first came in, and over the years that they've helped me. And I don't know, there's probably 25 or 30 things here. I also added to the list that we had last week. Brother Linegar always used this. He said, if you want to be, he didn't say it quite like this, but this is what he meant. If you want to be successful in God, you got to camp. C-A-M-P, conversation, attitude, motive, priority. And so I'm going to add that to that list along with some other things. And how I'll backtrack a little bit. How I got thinking about this, it's been a while back, and I finally found the answer for it. And I wanted to know why we have to make our bed every day. I know in the military you have to make your bed every day, but they never give you a reason for it. They just tell you, make your bed. But retired Admiral McRaven, who was over the Navy Special Forces, the SEALs, he started out, you know, they all start out the same, and he graduated to become Admiral over the SEALs. And he had 10 points, and he called it, if you want to change the world, make your bed. Well, every day. Well, we don't, I think our effort right now is on us individually. Mine is on my life and my family's, trying to become more effective in God, become a better Christian. And most people don't even know what a Christian is. It's not just a name. The term Christian was first used, I believe, in Antioch, and because so many people have been affected by the gospel that they were becoming Christ-like. That's what Christian means, Christ-like. So I want to be a better Christian. I want to be more Christ-like. And Admiral McRaven, I listened to his 10 points, and if you want to go online, you can Google it. All 10 points are really good. He talks about hope and adversity and other things. But he said, if you want to change the world, make your bed every day. He said, because if you don't learn to do the little things right, and they had to make their bed a certain way. They couldn't just, you know, haphazard or the first sergeant or the staff sergeant would tell you to go out and do calisthenics for 2 hours if you didn't do your bed right. Is that right, Brother Talley? I mean, they were real particular about the bed made because they had learned this secret. And this secret, it's really not a secret because God teaches the same thing through the Word, through His prophets in the Old Testament, and then through our ministry today, that if you don't learn to do the little things right, you'll never be able to do the big things right. So the list that we read and briefly went over, I want to talk about some of those things a little bit more in depth. Now, that list, I added to it, but it's not inclusive. It's not all inclusive. I mean, there's so much more things. You could, I'm going to go through the list here in a minute, but you can even put things like personal hygiene down there. If you know, we had a man. I know my wife always did this when the boys were growing up. She grew up this way, and I did too. You know, before we went out, our mothers would make us smile, make sure we brushed our teeth, you know, make sure the hair was clean. We didn't come from an affluent family, so we got our school clothes when I was younger at home. We would get them once a year right before school started, and they better last. So normally by the end of the school year, everybody had patches on their pants, the front of their pants. The socks were what they called them, darned, you know. I never did like those. All my socks, and you weren't going to get any more. You had to make them last. And so a lot of my socks, when I was growing up, they had holes in the toes, so I would have to double them underneath me so that it was uncomfortable. If I doubled them over, it was uncomfortable, but if I left the hole in the front, it was uncomfortable. So, but by the end of the year, your clothes were getting a little bit worn and frayed looking, but we always went, they may have had patches on them, but they were always clean. So when we went to school, it probably wasn't the best. There was people that were dressed a lot better than us, but we were always clean, and our clothes were clean. And that's part of one thing I'm going to talk about. I'm going to veer there real quick, is our conversation. Brother Linegar's conversation camp. Conversation, attitude, motive, and priority. Our conversation is not so much what we say. A lot of people are saying things today, and if you can get past what they're saying and look at their life, see how they present themselves, see how they live, I heard someone say one time, and actually I didn't hear him, but they wrote this. He said, I would rather see a message than hear a message. So, so a lot of people talk about things, but their life doesn't live up onto it. So one thing I added to that list, and this is something that if we do these things, like Brother Clyde Patton used to say, it's not any one big thing that I've done to make me successful in church building, in my Christian walk, and in my family life, and even natural life. All these things I'm giving you here can be applied to your natural life, on your job, if you want to be successful at job. One of the things I wrote down here was to be faithful. If you're not faithful at work, you're never gonna, you may not even stay there. But for sure, you'll never get promoted to a supervisor or whatever else you want to get promoted into. So I think the natural world and the military has taken these principles, I'll call them, of how to live for God and how to be successful in God, and they've applied it to the natural world and the military world. And if people follow these things, they'll be successful. So, but you can do all of these things off of this list, and then remember, this list is not all-inclusive. You can do all these things and still have problems. Just because you're living for God and doing the best that you can, and all these things you have to do, you may not be able to do them ultimately, or if you're trying, you're doing the best that you can. There may be room for improvement, but God will show you where that improvement needs to be. All God requires out of us is to take what we know to do, and like it says in the Bible, whatsoever thy hands find to do, do it with all thy might. So when God gives us a character, He gives us a priority, He gives us something in our life, and we not only know it, but we understand it. Why? We need to start doing that, and me included, with all of our might, and God will make that become a part of our character, a part of our nature. Remember last week we said, any one of these things, like reading your Bible, there's always something that could take the place of reading the Bible, but you need to it's easier if you set aside a regular time and maybe do it with somebody else or your whole family and have a set time to do it. And at first it's a little bit of a chore, to be honest, because there's always something that you could think, well, I'm going to take a half hour here and I could be doing this. I could go to church and I could hear the Bible or something, or I'll do this later. But I found that any one of these things, if you do them enough times consecutively, it actually becomes a habit. So what we do when God shows us that there's things in our life that we need to add, or there's things in our life that needs to be taken out, God works in both areas. He's adding and He's subtracting in our life. He's adding His nature, His character, His goodness to our life, but He's subtracting the old man and our old ways and our old habits, because we develop habits. So as we do these things, they become a habit. But that's not part, just because it's a habit doesn't mean it's a part of your nature yet. But if you do it long enough and you gain the understanding of why I'm doing this, then God can take that and He can put it down inside of you. He can change, He can put it down in your heart. It'll be part of your nature, a part of your character. So any one of these things are good. All of them together, they're if you do it with all your heart, with the understanding and the knowledge that God's given you, you will be successful in God. And I was going to go over them real quick. I may expound on a few again. Number one, and I didn't list this in any order of priority. I want you to understand all of these are important. Some are a little bit more important for a foundation, especially if you're just coming in. There's some that are more important, but I put read the Bible. Just set aside a time every day to read your Bible. For a certain amount of time, it become a chore for a while, but you'll finally get to the place where you love it. And Brother Paul McGowan and I, we were talking earlier about reading the Bible. He said, I've read the Bible through enough. I know about these parables, and because every once in a while, just for fun, I'll read that mixed up parable. And I think it's funny because they take all the parables and they mix them up. And I just laugh every time I read it. But if you don't know much about parables, you think, well, that sounds good to me, There was and the pastor who did this, it wasn't in the body. This was a true story, happened years ago. He got up because he saw that people weren't reading the Bible. He would get up and he would talk, and he'd want them to follow along in their Bible, and no one even brought a Bible to church. And so he got up one time. He says, "Next week we're gonna go over the book of Hezekiah. We're gonna go over Hezekiah 1, 2, and 3. We all know that there is no Hezekiah, especially 1, 2, and 3. But he told his conversation. He said, "Go home and read it. We're going to talk about it next week." And the pastor of this church could have done this in a better way. Next week he said, "All right, who all, last week I asked you to go home and read Hezekiah 1, 2, and 3. Raise your hand if you did that." And about half the congregation raised their hand. And that true story. I remember this, and he almost got cast out because he embarrassed the people so bad. But that's how most people are in religion today. If you tell them we're going to read out of the book of Hezekiah today, they say, "Okay, I'll find it in the Bible." Wow, it's not in there. Well, I think if you're here and you're in the body, I think you ought to be reading your Bible on a daily basis. That is important. If you ever want to be successful in God, you've got to read your Bible. And then when you come to church and someone like Brother McGowan did so good the other day, I told him, I said, "I wish you'd get up more. You really encouraged me so much." But someone like Brother McGowan gets up and he starts talking about the Bible, you know what he's talking about. He may not tell you to turn to the book of Job or something, but what he's talking about, basically where that comes from. And you ought to get to the place where when someone gets up and talks about a parable or a story, you can follow along with it. That's why I appreciate these young sisters that have taken the burden upon them to teach our young children the Bible stories. That is so important. And then later, when Brother Smith or Brother Fisher, Brother Pater, Brother McGowan, Brother Talley, or someone gets up talking about David or something, they can picture in their mind David and Goliath. They can picture Goliath being 9 foot 9 inches tall because they've gone over the story. And they know all that. So when someone starts to type that out to show the shadow of what the spiritual meaning is, it will catch on. That's how the Jews, they knew the Old Testament, which is all they had. There was no New Testament before Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, before the New Testament. But the Jews, when Christ came and he started giving them parables and he started talking to them, they could relate to it because they knew what he was talking about. So they knew the natural part of the Bible, and we need to do that. And that way God can quicken that, and we can see the spiritual implications for ourselves. So that's really important to read our Bible, and then to pray a certain time every day. But if you're going through something, pray more often. It's like Brother Whitlow. I told you that story yesterday, and I will repeat it. It is a good story. He asked God, "What does it mean to pray without ceasing?" And God let him know, well, you eat without ceasing, You know, you sleep without ceasing. You drink water without ceasing. You do all these things because if you don't, it's going to affect your natural body. Sooner or later, if you don't eat, or if you don't sleep, or if you don't drink water, you're going to affect, it's going to affect your natural body. So it is with prayers. We have to pray without ceasing on a regular, routine basis. It doesn't mean that while you're working at a 5-ton stamp machine, that's stamping out metal parts, you might pray that your finger's not in there, but you're paying attention to that. I used to have to use a grinder. Well, not used to, but I've used a grinder many times to cut off pipe in really bad places, and you're not supposed to do it, but plumbers do it all the time. They'll take the guard off because you can't get the grinder in there with a cutting wheel. It always scared me. And I could have been praying, but my mind was focused on what I was doing because I knew if that thing kicked back, either the blade or me are going to be hurting. And usually, I never got hurt. I don't recommend anybody, but there's times where you can't be praying. You have to pay attention 100% to your job. But then there's times, like at lunch, you can get away and pray for 5 minutes. Or what I like, my wife and I've got in the habit of this too, and this is actually part of our conversation. When we go out to eat, I've seen other people pray. They just maybe bow your heads for I've seen some long prayers at restaurants, but I've seen some, thank you, Lord, for this food, we bless it. And that's what my wife and I do. That's part of our conversation. Nobody can hear what I'm saying, but they know that I'm asking God to bless my food. That's part of my conversation. It's more important to see what a person, their life and what they do than what they say. So our conversation, and it takes years and years to develop our conversation. My conversation is still developing because God is still showing me things, even as sweet, Brother Fisher, as I am today. There's still things in my life that I could be more acceptable unto God. And there's some things I'm working on right now, and some things I don't even see. You may see them in my life because you've got it out of your life, but I don't see them yet. God hasn't dealt with me about that. But the nice thing about that is, as long as I'm doing the best I can, even though I can't see it, if I'm working on what God has shown me to work on, I'll be acceptable in His sight. That means I'll have imputed righteousness. I'll be counted righteous in the eyes of God. So set aside a time to pray. Let be a part of your conversation. I like this one. The Bible says to greet the brethren with a holy kiss. And I said, well, that doesn't mean today's society, that wouldn't be acceptable to go up and, for a man to kiss a man. But I can greet the brethren with a holy handshake. I can greet you with a holy hug. I think that's a small thing, but that lets other people know you're my brother, you're my sister, and then get in the habit of calling people brothers and sisters, even when I'm out in public and I'm with some of y'all, or I'm with Brother Smith or somebody else. I don't care if somebody's around. I'll say Brother Smith, or I'll say Brother Fisher, and they may think I'm normal, but that makes us inclusive of one another. It makes me feel so good to know that you think I'm your brother, and that makes me feel a part. And that was one of the things I really appreciated about the church that Brother Smith had. I was in those 7 moves, all 7 of those moves in Texas. I was involved in those. I remember one move we had. We rented the one we spent so much time and money to fix it up. It was a little church, and we were there 5 or 6 months, and we even had a revival in there. And Brother Fred DeVore came down, and he was our evangelist and stuff. But I was involved in all 7 of those of moves, and it wasn't easy. But when I came in, I didn't call Brother Smith. I called him Pastor Smith. And he said, "Why are you calling me Pastor Smith?" And I said, "Because you're my pastor." Well, I was trying to make him my pastor, but he says, "Let me help you a little bit." He says, well, just call us brother and sister. That will make us all inclusive of one another. It's good that you recognize me as your pastor, but just call me Brother Smith or Sister Smith and it did. It helped me to blend my spirit and to feel a part. Everybody wants to feel like you're a part of what you're trying to enter into. Yeah, I remember when I first got into plumbing, I really wasn't a plumber, but God helped me get hired on at Springfield Public Schools, and I wanted to fit in so bad. I wanted to show everybody that I know just as much about plumbing as you do, and they could tell that I didn't, But I was trying to, around here, part of what I'm saying is we learn the terminology. Part of our conversation, we call each one brother and sister. But this man, he was the one that my boss put me with, and it was just God's blessing that put me on there, because when this man interviewed me, he said, "Have you ever worked on commercial water heaters before?" I said, "No." He said, "Okay, that's no problem." He said, "Have you ever worked on boilers before? Have you ever pulled tubes?" And I said, "No." He said, "Okay, that's no problem." Everything he asked me, I said no, and he said, "That's no problem." He hired me. So he put me with this one man. It was the first or second week that I was there. And this is part of our conversation too. I think when you come to church, which this church doesn't have this problem. When we come to church, everybody here, my suit's getting older. I bought this suit when Ruth got married. So that's been, how long has she been married? Been married 5 years. I still wear it, but I dry clean it, or if it needs dry clean, I'll do it. It's getting old. But I have other suits, but I like this one here. But I like to look nice. I'm not saying you have to wear a suit or anything. I'm just saying when you come to church, I try to make sure that what I'm wearing is clean, that my hair is combed back. There was a man, and it happened in this church right here, and he came 4 or 5 times. And I'm not going to tell you his name. He's passed away, and he wasn't part of the body. But every time he would come, I would be sitting on a platform, and Brother Smith would sit him right next to me. And the man, he apparently didn't bathe. He didn't practice personal hygiene. He was a nice man. He was an older man. But Brother Smith would always sit him right next to me. And I'd always be leaning like this because it was pretty bad, Now, his suit was clean, I'll grant that. But he needed a little bit of help on that personal hygiene thing. We don't have that problem here, so don't think that I'm talking about anybody here. I'm just saying that there are people that are going to come in, and they're going to try and fit in, and that's going to be part of it. Even parts of your natural life have to correspond to your spiritual life, because if you can't get the natural things done right, you're not going to be able to get the spiritual things done right. So that's why my wife, when our children would go out to school or they'd come to church, she'd make them smile. Your teeth better be clean. Is your hair combed? Your hair, because we wanted to look the best that we could when we went to church. That's part of our conversation there too. But we had a visiting minister one time. He was younger than I was. He wasn't a pastor. And so Brother Smith said, "Go ahead and put him on a platform. Just put him wherever you want to." So I put him right next to this other brother that happened to be visiting. And so I saw this brother. He was leaning like this against me, and he looked over and he says, "Thanks." I said, "Well, we're just learning to put on charity, aren't we, brother?" And I said, "Actually, I'm glad you're here today." But that's part of our conversation too, is our appearance. Natural things, One time, and sometimes people will judge you spiritually by what they see naturally. When we first started our church in Republic, none of us were doing good financially. Brother Smith has told you about how we all were really suffering when we first moved up to Missouri. It was terrible. It was awful. I mean, we really suffered. there was I can't remember, 7 families that moved up, and for a short while we lived in 2 houses, and one of the houses was called the flop house. It had 1 bathroom, and it wasn't working because the septic tank wasn't right. You could put a marble on this side of the house, and within just a few seconds, it would roll all the way across and hit the other side. So we had that, and then God blessed brother and sister Jerry York with this other house, and we lived with them for 6 months or something like that. But it was interesting. But we bought this little church, and I think we paid $40,000 for it. And back then we didn't even have money to pay attention. And so Brother Smith had an elders meeting, and he said, "Well, do y'all think we ought to buy that?" And I said, "It's $40,000. Where are we going to come up with $40,000? Well, God helped us, you know. Actually, our children, Sister Joni and Brother Jeremy, y'all don't know them, but some of you that you know who I'm talking about, and my older boys, they went out selling candy and stuff so that we had enough money to buy propane so that we could heat the building. And we had someone, and later I became friends with this person. When we first started the church, every car was run down. It was smoking. It may have been cleaned. It was the best that we had. But at least, you know, they would come to church and the cars would be clean. Because remember, if you can't get the little things right, you'll never be able to do the big things right. And part of that is doing things naturally. This person pulled in, and they saw that all the car. I'm not against older vehicles. I don't care as long as it'll get you to church and it'll get you back. If you take care of it, and if you don't open it up the back door and everything falls out or something. But every car there was old. I had this one. It was called. It was a red Dodge van, and everybody called it Smoky Joe because if you started it up, it would smoke. Now to sit there, it looked old, you know, but when you started it up, you know that this guy's really got a problem. But this person pulled into our parking lot, and they looked at the vehicles. If this person could have seen what was inside, even though we were doing our best to make these vehicles presentable, you know, try to be part of our conversation, we'd keep them clean the best that we could. That was the best that I had. That's all I couldn't even afford that. That was, you know, that came with us from California. This person saw the vehicles and they thought, my goodness, if the people inside are like the people that drive these cars, if the cars are like the people inside, I don't want anything to do with this church. And they turned around and they went away. Well, we couldn't help that, you know, because it was the best that we had, and it got us back and from church. But what I'm saying is, people will judge your conversation spiritually by what they see naturally. And it shouldn't be that way, but let's don't give people that God may be dealing with, let's don't give them a reason to turn around and drive out the parking lot for anything at all. That's part of our conversation. So what I'm saying is do the best with what God has blessed you with, however God's blessed you with. Take care of that. Learn to be a good steward. That's actually a part of this list of learn to be a good steward of what God has blessed you with. When I first came to the body, we didn't have anything. Old Smoky Joe wouldn't run. It didn't run for 6 months. I couldn't pay the bills. You'd look at me and say, this man is not blessed. This man must, wow, God's really after this man. But my life didn't line up with any of these things, and I started hearing these principles, and I slowly started adding them to my life, and I noticed that over the years, your life doesn't turn around. It doesn't matter if you do every one of these things every day. It takes a while for those things to become a habit, and then that habit becomes a part of your nature. So it took several years for some of these things to really start to show up in my wife and I's and my children's life. But they did start showing up, and when they did, God started blessing us because we were faithful. Anyway, I'm getting back to, we always found it was a good thing to call everyone brother and sister. Oh, I was going to tell you this story about when I first became a plumber. I didn't know the terminology, and when you first come in here, You won't know the terminology. I didn't know the terminology. I didn't know I was supposed to call him Brother Smith. I didn't see anything wrong. There's nothing wrong calling him Pastor Smith, but I was trying so hard to be a part, and I didn't know how to be a part. And that's how I was when I first got into plumbing. This man, his name, I won't tell you his name. He's been passed away a long time, but still not good to call his name. He asked me, we were working on some commercial type toilets, and I was still learning. I was pretending like I knew everything. And that's another thing. I went to my first meeting. That's one of the things that I wrote down here. If you want to be successful with God, go to meetings. I know over COVID, the meetings just about stopped, but COVID's over with, and I'm determined, and some of my children, we've talked about this, we're determined to go to more meetings because that will help you become a more successful person. Not only will you, a Christian, not only will you go and you'll hear things that will help you develop God in your life, but when you go and you see people like you, when you see people like you with the same hope, the same vision, the same desire that you have, and you may see hundreds or maybe even 1,000 of them, it encourages you to go back and get more. It makes you feel inclusive. But I was trying to become a plumber, and this man told me, he said, run out to my van and get a spud wrench. I've told this story so many times, but some of you may not have heard it. I had no idea what a spud wrench was. I thought it had something to do with the potato. I knew we weren't farmers, and I knew that we weren't looking for something, a wrench that you could do something with a potato with. I said, okay. I called him by his name and said, I'll be right back. So I was 32, 33, so back then I could run, so I ran all about the, I opened up his sliding door, and this must be something with plumbers. Most plumbers' trucks, you open the side door or the back door, and everything's piled about that deep. Am I right, Matthew? A lot of them are. I never let mine get that way. I thought, I don't want to be like that. I was never OCD, but I wanted, because every once in a while, my supervisor would go through the trucks, and I would want mine to be clean. But it would be so nice where you could open your side door, and if you needed a spud wrench, you could reach over here and get it. Or if you need a little Series 100 pump, it was right there. It's part of your character. And what that did, that by keeping my truck straight, that helped me in other areas spiritually of my life to prioritize things, to organize things. But he told me to run out and get a spud wrench. And I opened up the side door, and things are falling out. And I went, oh my God, help me now. What am I going to do? So I was frantic. I was sweating. And I'm thinking, I've got to find a spud wrench because I really want to fit in. There's such a desire to fit in that you'll just go out of your way. It doesn't matter if you join a tractor club, or if you're thinking about joining a tractor club, you'll go up and you'll talk about tractors. You may know nothing about tractors, but you'll find a way to talk about tractors because you want to be included in the tractor club. Whatever, and it's the same, it's human nature, and that's how people are when they come in here. Let's call them brother and sister because let's make them inclusive. Let's pull them in. So I started throwing things around, and I'm praying. I said, oh God, help me find a spud wrench. Help me find a spud wrench. And he finally walked out, and he says, what is the problem? And I didn't lie to him, but I didn't tell him the whole truth. And I said, so-and-so, I said, your truck is so bad, I can't find a spud wrench. And that's actually something of that's important, and I'm going to add this to the list too, is in our conversation, let's don't lie in our conversation. Let's don't be let's don't try to be more than what God is allowing us to be at the time, both naturally and spiritually. I wasn't a plumber, but I was sure going to convince him. He knew I wasn't a plumber, but I should have just said, Gene, I have no idea what a spud wrench is. And he would have said, oh, here it is. But instead, I led him to believe that I knew what a spud wrench was, but I couldn't find one. I was telling a lie. You know that? That's telling a lie. And that was in my spirit. And I talked about this before, how God helped me get that out of my spirit. It took a long process, but it can be that way naturally. we have to recognize, and this is part of being a successful Christian, we have to recognize where God has placed us in our family. If you're the head of the house, it's important to know that you're the head of that house. That's God's order. A lot of people don't know that. They don't know the order of God in their family. And it's important to know where you are in the local assembly. If you don't know where you are, you don't know how to, if you have a gift, if you have a talent, you won't know how to use it properly because you don't know where you are. You may know that you're at 8101 Colonel Glenn, Little Rock, Arkansas. What's the zip code? 7 blah, 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 blah. You may know where you are naturally, but you have no idea where you are to blend in to be effective, because you'll never be effective in your family, in your local assembly, and in the body if you don't know where you are in God's order. So a good example, I had this vision when I first came in. I had this vision after about 3 or 4 months. There was this man, and he would get me aside and he would start talking doctrine. The only one I wanted to get doctrine from at that time was Brother Smith, but this man was trying to give me doctrine. I didn't understand a word that he was saying. It was just going right over my head. It's probably, I look back at it now, and God was protecting me. But he'd been in the body just a little bit longer than I was, okay? And he was giving me what he had, but that's not what I needed. I didn't need what he had at that time, because our walk with God as individuals, we all have our own testimony. We all have our own conversation. That's something you have to develop, your own testimony. But I had a vision, a dream about this man, and we were walking down the hallway, and he was on stilts, I think 3-foot stilts, and he was walking, and we were talking to one another, and he towered over me. And when we were walking, side by side, and he would talk to me, and he'd look down at me. But when I'd answer, I would answer right where his face was, and I wouldn't look up. I would answer right to where his face was, and that bothered me. I thought it had a bad connotation. But Brother Smith, I went to him, and he told me, he says, no, that's God's showing you where you're starting to fit in this assembly, and he's showing you about this brother where he's not fitting in. This brother, you can think too high of yourself. First meeting I ever went to was in Houston. I'd been in the body for 6 months, and we met somebody, and I'm not going to say what church it was from. They had just came in, and I put my stilts on, and I started talking down to her, telling her, everything that God had showed me, and you could see it right over her head, and that dream came back to me. I was on stilts. I didn't know where God had put me. That wasn't my place to, I could have become friends with her or something, but not to try and give her, I didn't know the doctrine. I didn't understand the doctrine myself, and I'm trying to get it to her. How's that going to work? So you don't want to be on stilts, okay? You need to find out your position in your family. That's important, naturally and spiritually. You need to find where you're at in the assembly and in the body of Christ, because, you want to be able to use your stilts, and you're never going to be effective. You're never going to grow a whole lot until you find out where you are in the assembly for that. So another thing I listed down here are tithes, and I'm not going to spend it. This church, we don't have a problem with that. This church has got to be the most generous church of any church in the body, I would say. It's amazing how God has blessed us. You know why? Because we're faithful to support what God is doing on the mission works, and we become good stewards with what God has blessed us with, and then to be faithful to assemble, to be here for Bible studies, to be here for work days, to be here for Wednesday nights, to be here for Sundays. If Brother Painter or Brother Fisher call a family night, I may not stay for the whole thing, but I'll come and I'll eat pizza, and I'll visit for a little bit, because I learned years ago that if I want God to bless my life, I've got to be faithful in what my family's doing, my assembly's doing, and then the body of Christ, and then to honor those that have authority over us. There's men in this church that have more authority than some, and to learn to honor those. Well, and I don't want to go into that because we all know, Brother Smith has talked on that, to honor those whom God has worked in the ministry, honor those that are in the choir and the band. We really don't need too much, but that's important to know who to honor and how to honor. How do you honor somebody? I don't just want to go up and say, boy, I really honor you, brother. I really honor you. You know how I honor him? When he gets up and talks, I listens to him. Not just listen, but I incorporate what he's talking about into my life. Or when Brother Painter gets up and he gets up and talks about something, how I honor him, not just say, Brother Painter, boy, you really did a good job. And that's part of encouragement. We need to encourage one another continuously. I know that we all have a job to do, but it sure is nice to know when someone comes up and says, boy, Brother Painter, you really did a good job. And they really mean it. You can tell if somebody means it or not. Or play Brother Paul McGowan and Sister Harley Loriano. Once in a while they'll get up and they'll play the duet with their horns. I honor that because they're trying to bring God in. So I go up and I tell them, I said, you really blessed me today. So we can honor them by saying, thank you for what you're doing, but even more than that is we listen and we watch their lives. And that's another way we honor them is the good things you have in your life. I watch what they are because I want them in my life. How'd you get that? How did you become successful? So I try to emulate those things. And then ultimately we also honor those like our Brother Smith, the church pays this and the church pays that. That's another way to honor. And encourage. We just went over that. Here's one. If you see it, you own it. And if there's something to do in church and nobody's wanting to do it, then maybe God wants you to do that. Find something to do in church, both naturally and spiritually. If you have any kind of gift at all, let God use you. Do you play a horn? Talk to Brother Michael Smith. Say, I want to join the beginner band, or I want to sing in the choir, or Brother Scott York. How do I become an usher? What do I have to do? How do I dress? Is it being an usher just meaning I get that little pin? But what are my duties as an usher? So I honor. If I want to be an usher, I'll honor Brother Scott York by going and saying, how do I become an usher? And I listen to what he says, and I incorporate that in my life. That's part of honor. So, and then participate. That's very important. We're participating now, but find something to do in church. If all you can do is clap your hands, the Bible says, whatsoever thy hand findeth to do it with all thy might. I'm telling you, if all you can do is clap your hands, you better clap with all your might. But we can do more than clap our hands. We can sing. We can raise our hands. You say, well, I'm not feeling the Spirit of God. Probably not, because you're not participating. If you want to feel the Spirit of God, participate a little bit. Listen and take notes. Well, that's self-explanatory. Give offerings of time. That's important. There's men and there's women who come down here, and it's not work day, it's not church day, it's not Wednesday. They just come down here because they want to do it. They want to give an offering of their time. Find out how to give an offering of your time. Create anchors in your life. Sister Dawn and I, we talked about that last weekend. I've created two big anchors in my life. One was my relationship with Brother Smith, and another one was a song that helped me get through a really difficult time. Those two things over my Christian walk have become anchors. Find an anchor And when times are rough, that anchor will always be there. Don't throw away that anchor. Never throw away that anchor. Let it become a big part of your life and anchor you into that. The Bible calls it a nail in a sure place. You better have a nail in a sure place. And that can be, and we're going to run out of time, okay, but find an anchor. It can be a person that you're, well, it could be anything. It could be an experience in your life, but find something that will anchor you to Christ so hard in His people that you don't even think about pulling that anchor up. You can't. That anchor finally becomes one of these anchors that I have in my life with my relationship with Brother Smith. It's become so big over the years that even if I want to, I don't think I could pull it up. I don't think I could because it's become such a part of me. It's a big anchor. Develop a big anchor. And if you need some help, talk to one of these brothers and say, I need an anchor in my life. They'll give you some anchors. They got anchors in their life. They can say, this is what's in my life, and this might help you. Speak in tongues as often as you can, hopefully every day. For sure, if there's a move of the Spirit and you're in the platform, come down. Get in the Spirit. I used to do that when I was playing drums. I'd lay my drumsticks down, I'd get out. Because the Spirit, that's what's going to change us. That nature of God, His Spirit that dwells down inside of us, if it never works in our life, number one, one thing the Spirit of God does, it washes away. When it comes in, it washes away all the trash out of our life. Sometimes you just get trash collected, this and that, and your life fills up with this and that. Spirit of God comes in and whoosh, all that's gone. And then I found that when you really are in the Spirit, that's when God can deal with you, and He can show you something that He wants to add to your life, something He wants to take away out of your life. He wants to maybe put an anchor in there, or maybe He just wants to bless you. But in those times of refreshing, as Peter called it, we all need those. Don't go long without those times of refreshing. Speak in tongues as often as you can. Trust God in the small things. Start out with the small things. My wife and I, we've done that over the years. We started out with small things. She's going something through physically, and I went through something physically for 3 years. I had to trust God about the aneurysm. I had 3 aneurysms, 2 of them on this side, 1 on this one. And this one wasn't operated on the first time, and I felt like I needed to trust God. I had no way to trust God when this one over here burst. It happened so quick that I didn't have time to trust. But I told my wife, and I told Brother Smith, I said, look, I feel like I need to trust God. This thing over here, it could go any minute. Poof, just like that, gone. And I knew I'd already been through that once. It's no fun. If you've never had an aneurysm, a hemorrhage, 50% of the people die automatically just like that. It wasn't fun. But I felt like, now this has to be a personal thing with you too, okay? But I was able to trust God, and I waited 3 years before I got surgery on this side, but I felt like God dealt with me and told me it was time. But it took years of trusting God in the small things. Brother Painter gives that his part of his testimony, and you ask God for money, and how much was it?
I think it was a 25-cent check.
It was a 25-cent check. Well, sometimes we start out and Brother Painter said it may have been $2. We start trusting Him in the small things. And when we see, and when we start have confidence in God, because we see that He is able to meet all of our needs according to His riches and glory. That's why making your bed every morning, like this Admiral Raven says, if you want to change the world, make your bed every morning, because if you can't do the small things right, you'll never do the big things right. One of these days, you may be in a situation with health, and you need to get counsel on this too. I went and got counsel because I should have had this operated, but I felt like most people get it operated on anyway. But I wanted to trust God, and I'm glad that I did it. In fact, when I went in, because I'd had a bunch of CTA scans, when I went in, the doctor says, well, I think you'll be okay. We've watched it for 3 years. I think we can catch it in time for it. it grows anymore, because what happens, they grow, and this one hadn't grown, and he hadn't changed shape, hadn't changed size. But the doctor told my wife, I started feeling very strong that I need to have this operated on. Now, could have God have healed me? Yes, he could have healed me, but God wanted me to go through this one thing, because I'm still learning him. I still have to trust him in the small things, and I want to learn to trust him in the big things. But the doctor told my wife, he said, I'm so glad your husband came in, because what they do is they pull back your skin, they cut out part of your skull, and then they slowly spread your brain to find the blood vessel, the artery. And it is true, the aneurysm hadn't changed size. But every time my heart beat, it would go poof, poof, poof. He said it was ready to rupture. And it was God that did it. But I learned to trust. See, I've been in the body now for 38 years. And it took a long process for me to get to the place where I felt comfortable on trusting him. 30 years ago, I never could have done that. You couldn't have, no, you're crazy. I'm going, and I still go to the doctor. I've got 3 different types of doctors I go to. I am not preaching against doctors. Go to the doctor. That's not what I'm saying. Go to the doctor. I take prescription medication. Brother Term takes prescription medication. I do, because I have some problems. But this was something I felt like God dealt with me with. You need to go to the doctor, you need to get help, but if you feel God dealing with you, you may need to get some counsel before you do something like I did. Because I could have died, but God knew, and God showed me when it was time to get it operated on. Will he do that again? I don't know. It's only happened one time to me. But learn to trust him in the small things, and when the big things come around, big things like family matters, you got job problems or something, you can learn it's Sister, I love Sister Linda Fisher's testimony. She's learned to trust him. She loses her keys a lot, and God helps her to find them. Well, she's learned to trust God in those small things, and she's learned to trust him in the bigger things too. But sometimes we start out, learn to trust him in the small things, and then when the big things come around, we'll have a basis to trust him on, because he's proved himself over and over and over again. Don't go out and do what I did. That's what I'm trying to say. There's people that's had heart surgeries in here. I'm all for it. If I had a heart problem, I would get surgery right now unless God dealt with me to do something else. So don't think what I'm saying. This is my testimony. But I just brought that up to show that when I first started serving God, I wouldn't have been able to do that. Show yourself friendly. Big smile. Go up to somebody, shake their hand, big smile. In here and out there. Find something to witness about. Be friendly. My son and I and Jacob and Terry and brother and sister York, we were at this place yesterday. We were all 6 of us together, had a great time. And there was this man, and I showed myself friendly to him. I started talking about church. I got a chance to witness to him. Had a big smile on my face, and I found something that we had in common. I'd been on with Brother Smith. I'm not a missionary, but I said I'd been with my pastor, Brother Smith, on a foreign mission trip, and he says, I've always wanted to be a missionary. I said, look, see, I was just being friendly. But, so I witnessed, and he may come Wednesday. If he does, okay, he's got a long beard, and he keeps it with a rubber band there. It's got long hair. I don't care. I don't care. We have a message that is wonderful. Just come in and hear it. I want him to start getting all these principles, and I hope he shows up Wednesday. I don't care what he looks like. But show yourself friendly. I've been to churches as a visitor. I'd walk in, and this is not a body church. I'd walk in, and it's like people turn their back on you. I thought, well, ooh, I don't want to go to that church. Everybody sits there, they don't, This church, we don't have that problem. We don't have that problem because before church starts, between band practice and church, my goodness, everybody's visiting and socializing. We don't have that problem here, but Somebody's going to come in, and they're not going to want to be friendly. They're not going to want to be talked, but we got to show ourselves friendly, and we'll do that with with the people, our neighbors. I become friends with our neighbors. They don't go to this church. Some of them don't even go to church, but I'm friendly. I go over and help them. Several months ago, all my azaleas and roses were getting eaten up by Japanese beetles, and I went out and I was going to buy. And this neighbor across the street, he takes really good care of his yard. So I went over and talked to him and his wife. They don't go to church or anything. And I called him my name. I said, I'm really having a hard time with Japanese beetles. I said, I'm fixing to go down, and I'm going to go down to the farmer's market. I'm going to buy me some Japanese beetle traps. It says, and they had heard of Japanese beetles before, but they didn't know what to do about it. I said, how about this? I said, I'm going down. You want me to buy you some? He said, yeah. So I went down. I bought him some. I gave it to him. They wanted to pay me. I was friendly. So that's part of my conversation. Let's be that shining light. Let's develop a shining light in our life. Let's be friendly in church and in out of church. Let's help people if we can. Develop a relationship with a pastor. That doesn't just mean to call him Pastor Smith. That was my problem. But developing a relationship with him is you grow where you have confidence in him. You have confidence in his ability to lead the church and to help you and your family. And when you go to him for counsel, you have confidence that God is going to help him to know how to help you. Develop a relationship with your pastor. Find something to do in church, I said that. Go to meetings, fellowship with God's people, invite people over. When my wife and I, when we first came into the body, we were always at somebody's house, or we were having somebody over. It helped us to develop a relationship, and we felt more like a family. When you feel more like a family, it's harder to leave. If something happens and you get offended, there are times where I get offended at my family. Have you ever not been offended at somebody in your family? If you've never been offended in your family, there's something wrong with you. Then you never have anything to do with your family. Because if you have family and you interact with them at all, sooner or later something's going to happen, you're going to get offended. Well, it's the same thing in church. I don't cut my family off because I offended them or they offended me. We get it right and we go on. When you start to feel like you're a part of a family in here by calling brother and sister and you find, you just start to feel like you're a part of your family, and something happens. It doesn't even have to be that someone offended you. It could be something naturally happened. You're going through a hard trial. The Bible said when you've done all you can do to stand, then stand. And that takes having a family-type relationship with the people in this assembly. And it'll keep you from leaving. It will. I'm not going to leave my family just because we're at odds for a short time, nor am I going to leave the church because I'm at odds at you. I'm looking at you, but I don't have a problem with you. But if Brother Fisher and I, if we have a problem, I'm not going to leave. He's my brother. He's my family. So I've developed that kind of relationship, and he's developed that kind of relationship. If I ever do anything to offend you, don't leave me. But family don't do that. So anyway, we're out of time, and we've got more, and I probably won't cover this again because Brother Smith will be back next week. But for me, these things helped me, and they're still helping me. I still do these things on a daily basis. Some of them I'm still working on. Some of them are a part of my nature now. So yeah, I hope I was able to say something maybe and I know all of you know these things, but it doesn't hurt to go over these things again. If a new person comes in, maybe you can be their mentor. Maybe you can be the conversation they're looking for because you have these things in your life. Anyway, thank you for listening to me, and God bless you, and we'll see you upstairs. Smile.